Hello, this is the Harboring Light. I'm Mary. I give a conservative perspective about the world around me. Feedback is immensely important. Feel free to reach out in the best way. Two ways here: email and through YouTube. All right. As I mentioned, I am working on having an advertisement about my podcast, and when I get all of that sorted out and I get everything out there, I will let you know about all of that. All right, so I'm pretty much on all of the different podcast platforms. It won't be too hard to find me. And let's get into the topic of choice here. So, continuing out with the month of love here. Gotta warm up with Valentine's this weekend on Saturday with no other than Richard Marx. Now, Richard Marx, I like the 80s here. You know, for those that have been listening to me for a while, appreciate y'all. Y'all know I really think the 80s is just rad. It's just, I really like that decade. So, Karl Marx, sorry, Richard Marx. Yeah, he was really driving it home with the aspects of love songs and all the different ranges of love and understanding in there. So with that said, I'm going to go in and talk about Richard Marx. And then to follow up with this, on Monday, I'm going to talk about the band Chicago. And then on that Wednesday, I'm going to talk about Al Green. All right, here we go. Getting right into my thoughts. So, Richard Marx here. Yeah, I remember hearing it, songs growing up, in the early 90s and so. But, it mainly through television or commercial. And it's quite interesting that with the commercial is that I remember there was an SNL bit back when SNL was still decent in the early 2000s with Horatio Sands and Jimmy Fallon. And it, excuse me, they were making a joke, particularly with the song by Cutting Crew. Hold on just a second there. By the Cutting Crew, I'm dying in your arms tonight, right? And it was, I guess it was supposed to be an homage to the aspects or a nod to the aspects of Adam Sandler, what he did with Wedding Singer, and the sketch with Adam Sandler with Wedding Singer, and just rehashing that for another generation. And so, it's quite interesting the way everything was depicted, as it was the same tonal sound or the same beat, and fleshing out the idea that everything was kind of sim-pop, no nuance, sort of. You can take that perspective there. And I remember a friend when I was going to college, she was saying, oh yeah, 80s music, that is kind of all sounds the same, and then, sort of like a commercial backdrop for something. And, that's really an interesting take, too, with the aspects of that. But, with all that joking aside and all those comments about it, at the time of the 80s here was a time where particularly when you get in the aspects of pop, people had to really sing, whether it was real or whatever. They really had to sound authentic. And I think that Richard Marx really put his stamp on the aspects of reining in on talking about the aspects of love and relationships, to where, yes, overblown, but it has different variations of sounds. So, for instance, the one song, Hold On to the Night, is very candlelight, sort of wispious, right? And then you get into, which I'm going to get into some facts about it, I think it really encompasses the aspect of the spirit of the mood of the 80s here. Particularly youth-oriented spirit here. It gives a certain essence of everything. And that was what was going on. Here, going back to all the way back, you get the storytelling in the jazz with Billie Holiday, Duke Ellington, and an instrumental sort of piece. And then you get on to the 50s where, you get the rock and roll, blues, pop. It was different artists really telling a story. And then you get into the 80s where they use visuals, right, to encompass, to commingle, correlate in a way, sort of what the message is about. And that can be real hard to do sometimes, and seems kind of surface level or disingenuous when you get in the aspects of pop music, because pop music for the most part is supposed to focus on things that make people feel good for the most part. But all the sappiness and everything carrying on with the association with Karl Marx, I think that he, in the aspects of his sound, was really, able to get in there. And I'm going to address, more impact of talking about artistic bent and the emotional side of different ranges when we get into Kate Bush and Peter Gabriel. So, I'm going to mix up all that while we go on this journey in the month of February. Okay, with that aside here, that little tidbit said, I'm going to first get into some facts about the aspects of Richard Marx, and then I'm going to end by talking about a particular song I think, carries everything out and ends the point with how Richard Marx was able to encapsulate a certain mood and a sound that is very much associated with the 80s. All right, so here we go. And of course, these sources, will be provided here for you. Okay? All right, so I think I'm going to do it this way here. Okay, first, I'm going to read from Encyclopedia. Okay? All right. Load up here. All right, Richard Marx. Okay, it says, Richard Marx, once hailed as rock's newest notor kid by Steve Doherty of People, worked for years singing backup and writing songs for stars like Lionel Richie and Kenny Rogers before landing a solo recording contract in '86. And so, and Sheryl Crow herself, she was a backup singer, if I'm not mistaken, for rest in peace, Michael Jackson. And there's a lot to be said when someone who was a backup singer and the music industry, what I'm finding out and learning even more so, there's unfortunately can be a kind of a weird take on that where, oh, it's just people, they have the talent, but we, to get, I guess you can say it's either two things to look at it from this point of view. To get pay their dues, you'll be a backup singer, and then, hopefully eventually you'll be a solo artist or, something like that, sort of like that. Or they don't have the look, I guess you want to say, or the commercial look that music companies are looking for. So they say, okay, backup. So this is quite interesting that he was a backup singer here. All right, his first album. All right, let me go back and make sure you can still recording. Yes, I am. Make sure I am. Can you hear me here too? Okay. Yes. All right. So, before landing a solo recording contract in 1986, his first album, amply titled Richard Marx, spawned 4 hit singles and earned him a Grammy nomination. Marx's good looks have brought him with Doherty as a label as a herd of young female fans, but he has also been praised as a serious, articulate musician. All right, let me take that off quick. Okay, so getting back here. By Anne Elliot and Mademoiselle, and a great singer by Revere J.D. Kornstein of Rolling Stone. So Mark was born in Chicago to parents who both earned their livelihoods by doing commercial jingles. So, ran in the family here. All right, so by the time he was 18, Mark's songwriting talents had improved to the point where he got a response when he sent a demo tape through an odd series of acquaintances to a pop star of Lionel Richie. A friend they were going to school. A friend of Karl Marx, they went to school, is what I'm interpreting this as saying, in Atlanta, Georgia, and was roommates with a guy who grew up with a guy who was then working for the Commodores. So Marx then went to Los Angeles and entered the music business. This was on the advice of Lionel Richie. So in LA, Marx sang backup on some of Richie's hits, including All Night Long and Running with the Night. And so, I can see that a lot, how, because you have to have a on-point talent to rein that in about this aspects of backup singing, to be able to match or bring out the voice of the main singer. So, I can really see that. That's something. He also wrote What About Me for country star Kenny Rogers and composed music for the group Chicago. So, hey, all in good company, especially with Chicago. So when Marx was 19, he was recruited to write a song for the film Staying Alive. While doing this, he met the film's female lead actress and dancer Cynthia Rhodes, though she at first rejected his romantic overtones. Oh, okay. All right, so meanwhile, Mark's quest to become a solo artist was initially frustrating, primarily involved in a more mellow, ballad-oriented sound for his backup work with other artists. In his free time, he worked and wrote rock songs, and Mark had the discouraging experience of having a friend who was a music producer tell him, "You're never going to get a record. You're not an artist." So Mark admitted this to Doherty. Despite this judgment and the fact that he was turned down by every record company at least 3 times, the perspective of Doherty, but this is facts here. The young singer-songwriter kept trying. And that's initially what you should ultimately do. Because it's one thing to be, delusional and thinking that you have talent when you really don't. But when you know that you have something going and you keep trying, it's really a lot of rewards with the journey and all of that. So finally in 86, Mark was signed by Manhattan Records after an audition with the president of the company. Richard Marx, with the result of this, Richard Marx got an album which was a rapid success. So the hit single from it included "Don't Mean Nothing," should have known better, and "Endless Summer Nights," which I'm going to talk about in the summer nights. Though it took Mark until 89 to release his second effort, Repeat Offender. His music continues to be extremely popular. The Rolling Stone critic considered the label Offender disappointing. He thought that the songs go down as easily as chocolate milk. I mean, you take that also. You take it with a grain of salt, but it's one thing that, okay, everybody has their own opinion, and a well-balanced person will respect that. But as I mentioned, something about critics, they are in the business of bad mouthing for some reason. It's weird. And a really good example of this is, now I mentioned this some time back, but there is a really decent documentary on Hulu entitled Brats. So I'm going to make this very short and concise here. So essentially what it is a documentary that's talking about the Brat Pack, in the 1980s with the movies like The Breakfast Club, Pretty in Pink, and so forth. So Andrew McCarthy is behind the documentary, and so he goes and talks to all the essential characters and actors and actresses that were a part of that explosive decade of movies. And he said, Andrew McCarthy said his reason for making this documentary is when this one critic came out and saying that, they're pretty much, I'm parodying what these critics said, pretty much making them seem like there's some type of flash in the pants idiots, right? That kind of, they, instead of running with their new notoriety and what they can do in the world of film and taking that serious, that, eventually they're going to fade out and nobody's going to take them serious. They kind of, they paid attention to it for the most part. Some of them did more, some of them didn't, more or less, versus some that did. And it's one of those things that really was a disdain and a stain on Andrew McCarthy, to where he wanted to make this documentary as a way of reconciling and a therapeutic measure of figuring all these things out. And then again, no, my point is, this critic was in the business to do this, to make notoriety off of them and to ride the coattails, because that's all it was about. And, how unfortunate is that? Because the generations that came after all the young actors and actresses that were a part of the Brat Pack really redefined a sort of culture and put a different image of the Generation X and really defining the 90s. When we get into, it's quite interesting because, not Matthew. Yeah, Matthew. No. I can't remember. Matthew Damon. No, not Damon. Broderick or, I think it's Damon here. Because he was in Brat Pack, and then during going, in different assorted movies when the Brat Pack era was going, and he posted, and he really made a career for himself. You know, it would have been quite interesting to have someone like him on there to give his point of view about everything. But anyway, you know, you got your 90210s, you got your, you know, aspects of your MTV generation, you got all of these things that came after that, at the wave of that, and so forth. And then, you know, when I was coming of age, you know, in the early 2000s and so forth, all of that. And that's in thanks to the aspects of starting with the Brat Pack here. All right, so, you know, take criticism for what it is. All right, so with that said here, I'm going to end, and I am going to get right into here the song In the Summer Night. Okay, let me go right back here. So, Endless Summer Nights. All right, so let's get into the depths of what it's about. So, Endless Summer Nights is a song written and performed by American rock singer Richard Marx and released in January of 1988 as the third single form in his triple platinum debut album. Wow. So the song peaked number 2 on the U.S. pop and adult contemporary charts in the year of 87. So it's quite interesting the aspects of how popular music and rock, the rock genre, was seen in the 1980s, because it was a lot of commercialness with the way rock singers were presented in the 80s too, and that's quite interesting. And Richard Marx, you know, also embodied that pretty well in his own light too. All right, so Richard Marx. 10 facts about this song, and let me get into this. So, In the Summer Nights by Richard Marx was released in '88, and it gained immense popularity and became one of Marx's biggest hits, reaching number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100 chart. The song was written by Richard Marx himself, showcasing his talent not just as a singer but also as a songwriter. What was the inspiration behind the song? So he says the song was inspired by his teen trip to Hawaii and his then girlfriend. So In the Summer Nights is essentially a love letter to that time, capturing the nostalgia of youth summer love. And so, yes, you know, there was a lot of essence and era at the time in the 1980s about the coming of age and the, you know, disposition between those things. You know, you have as I mentioned with the Brat Pack, and then you have movies like The Karate Kid and all these kind of points. And I think this In the Summer Nights really captured that sort of essence in a bottle here. All right, so genre. In the Summer Nights is a pop rock song. Its catchy melody and heartfelt lyrics help to become a classic for the genre. All right, so let's go on to the music video. The music video for the song, directed by Dominique Sena, was just as popular as the tune itself. It featured Richard Marx reminiscing about the beautiful summer memories with his ex-girlfriend. The album. It is a feature on Richard Marx's debut album, Richard Marx, which was a major commercial success. So reception. There, you know, of course, with critics. Critics praised the song for its lyrical compositions and Marx's strong vocal deliverance. Okay, live performances. Endless Summer Nights has been a staple in Marx's live performances, often provoking a heartfelt response from fans. So this is a really connotation of, you know, his true talent. You know, again, what do they sound like in person versus the hearing them on an album? If they sound the same, if not better, live in person without anything, hey, you know, you got the talent there. All right, so despite Marx being well known for his rock songs, Endless Summer Nights showcases his ability to create a poignant and effective romantic ballad. Marx's career. The success of Endless Summer Nights played a crucial role in securing Marx's place as one of the leading artists of the late 80s and also on to the 90s. The song is particular and is often cited as one of a fan favorite. All right, so this reaches the end. And of course, I would like to know what you all think. Feel free to reach out to me. And as I mentioned in the beginning of the show, the best way to do that is 2 ways, through email and YouTube. All right, so tune in, turn up, and definitely take care. Bye-bye for now.